A few days after filing for divorce from her husband, Hannah Chapman was surprised by the arrival of a lawyer named Dawson. He informed her that she had inherited a house from her great-granduncle, Henry, who had just passed away. To be honest, Hannah had only just learned that she had a wealthy great-granduncle because, for the past 25 years since her parents' death, no relatives or family members had ever cared about her. On the other hand, Hannah felt very grateful because this good news came just as she was facing problems in her marriage. Hannah knew that her marriage could not be saved, but now, at least, she had a reason to fight for custody of her young daughter, Chloe, because she had just inherited her great-granduncle's wealth. During the divorce process, Hannah was granted full custody of Chloe, while her husband, Frank, was only given visitation rights on weekends. After officially inheriting Henry's wealth, Hannah decided to move to Henry's house, which was located in a rather remote area. Fortunately, Chloe was very excited when they moved there because the house was very large and had many rooms. Dawson explained to Hannah that Henry rarely stayed in the house because he often traveled for business. Although the house was old and its paint had faded, it was well maintained because Henry always hired someone to clean it once a month. Before leaving, Dawson seemed to want to say something to Hannah, but he changed his mind and left without saying anything. Meanwhile, Chloe, excited about her new home, chose a room at the end of the corridor with a window overlooking the swimming pool at the back of the house. While Chloe was sitting on the edge of her bed, looking out the window, she was startled by a green fly that suddenly landed on her hand. Panicking, Chloe screamed in fear, causing Hannah to rush to her daughter's room to check on her. Crying, Chloe told her mother about the large green fly that had landed on her hand. Hannah quickly calmed her daughter, assuring her that the green fly was harmless and that there was no need to be afraid. She then shooed the fly away and instructed Chloe to keep her window tightly closed. One night, Chloe, who was sleeping, suddenly woke up to find that her bedroom door was already open. At the same time, she heard her mother's voice calling her name, so Chloe got out of bed and went out of her room to look for her mother. Strangely, Chloe found no one in the corridor, and when she went to her mother's room, she saw Hannah fast asleep. Chloe then walked back to her room, unaware that a dark entity was watching her from behind. In the following days, Chloe began to hear her mother's voice calling her name more frequently. When Chloe told Hannah about it, Hannah said that Chloe might be hearing echoes bouncing off the walls of the house. Hannah explained that since they were the only ones living in that large house, it was natural for their voices to echo throughout the place. However, as time went on, Chloe not only heard her mother's voice, but also strange sounds that seemed to come from inside her head. These voices often whispered things to Chloe, indirectly causing her to say strange things. Worried about her daughter, Hannah brought a child psychiatrist, Mrs. Quinn, to their home to check on Chloe's condition. During the session, Mrs. Quinn tried to persuade Chloe to talk about the whispers that were bothering her. However, Chloe refused to explain anything to Mrs. Quinn, saying that the voices had told her not to say anything to the psychiatrist because they would kill her. When Mrs. Quinn asked about them, Chloe suddenly screamed hysterically, covering her ears. Seeing her daughter so frightened, Hannah quickly hugged Chloe to calm her down and asked Mrs. Quinn to end the counseling session. After Mrs. Quinn left the house, Chloe took out a sketchbook and crayons and began drawing something. Shortly after that, on her way home from Hannah's house, Mrs. Quinn, who was driving, was suddenly startled by a green fly landing on her hand. She tried to shoo the fly away, but at the same time, a swarm of green flies began emerging from the car's dashboard and started attacking her. Mrs. Quinn struggled to drive as the swarm of flies obstructed her view. At that moment, she did not realize that her car had veered off the road and fallen into a ravine, causing her to die instantly. The following day, Hannah told Chloe to get ready because Mrs. Quinn was coming for a counseling session. Surprisingly, Chloe told her mother that Mrs. Quinn wouldn't be coming because she was already dead. Hannah was shocked to hear this and asked Chloe how she knew that. Chloe innocently said that the voices had told her, even mentioning that Mrs. Quinn died in an accident shortly after leaving their house. Hannah quickly called Mrs. Quinn's office, and her assistant confirmed the psychiatrist's death. Hearing this, Hannah immediately recalled Chloe's words during her conversation with Mrs. Quinn when Chloe said that they would kill her. However, Hannah thought it might all just be a coincidence, especially since the police had concluded that Mrs. Quinn died in an accident and had closed the case. Around midnight, Chloe woke up from her sleep, startled by the sound of her toy suddenly making noise. Chloe tried to reach for her toy, but at the same time, she saw a dark figure behind her window curtain. Chloe couldn't clearly see what the dark figure looked like, but she instinctively knew that it was not human. She quickly returned to her bed, curling up in fear under her blanket. At that moment, Chloe sensed that the dark figure was slowly moving toward her bed. She was trembling with fear, gripping her blanket tightly as the figure came closer, ready to attack. Chloe screamed as loudly as she could, causing Hannah to wake up and rush to her daughter's room. Hannah turned on the light and tried to calm Chloe, who was still shaking with fear. Chloe then told her mother about the dark figure, but Hannah assumed Chloe might have just had a nightmare. The next day, Hannah gave Chloe a walkie-talkie and told her that she could use it to call her anytime she needed help. Chloe seemed thrilled to have it and often played with the walkie-talkie, enjoying the ability to talk to her mother anytime and anywhere. Living in a remote area meant Hannah had to buy large quantities of supplies to last for a while. As Hannah was about to leave the supermarket, an old woman named Martha, who knew that Hannah was living in Henry's house, warned her to move out immediately, saying the house was cursed. Martha even grabbed Hannah's arm tightly, as if emphasizing that she wasn't making things up. At the same time, a young woman named Elena tried to help Hannah and told Martha to let her go. Elena then apologized to Hannah for her mother, Martha, bothering her. However, Elena did not deny what Martha said about Henry's house being cursed and suggested that Hannah leave the house as soon as possible for the safety of her family. Hannah had been informed by Dawson that Henry's house was once a place where women accused of being witches were tried and executed. However, nothing strange had happened in the house since she moved in, so Hannah chose to ignore the warning. A few days later, Hannah was informed that Martha had died of a heart attack. Shortly after that, Elena was found dead, having hanged herself in her room. The police concluded that Elena was depressed after her mother's death. Hannah thought that their deaths happening so close together might just be a coincidence, although, in reality, there was an inhuman evil force involved in their tragic deaths. The same evil force that also killed Mrs. Quinn in her attempt to help Hannah's daughter, who was hearing strange voices in the house. One day, while Hannah was cooking in the kitchen, she was suddenly startled by Chloe's scream as she fell into the swimming pool. Hannah quickly jumped into the water to save her daughter, who was nearly drowning. Fortunately, Chloe was rescued and wasn't injured, though she still seemed very shocked. Chloe then explained to her mother that she was trying to get her ball that had fallen into the pool. Chloe added that she had tried to contact Hannah through the walkie-talkie, but Hannah had told her to get the ball herself. Upon hearing that, Hannah became confused and told Chloe that she never received a walkie-talkie call from her, so it was impossible for her to have told Chloe to get the ball from the pool. However, Chloe insisted that she had heard her mother's voice on the walkie-talkie and thought it was indeed Hannah speaking to her. Knowing her daughter was still in shock from nearly drowning, Hannah decided to let Chloe rest in her room while she prepared dinner. After dinner, Chloe seemed engrossed in drawing something in her sketchbook, while Hannah chose to read a book. Still afraid of the dark figure that had appeared in her room, Chloe begged her mother to stay with her while she slept. Hannah nodded and smiled in response, then told Chloe to go to bed. As requested, Hannah gladly stayed with her daughter until Chloe was completely asleep. Knowing that Chloe was sound asleep, Hannah decided to return to her own room. That day had been exhausting, both physically and mentally, so Hannah fell asleep almost immediately after turning off the lights, unaware that a green fly had landed on her ear. The fly then crawled into Hannah's ear, but she didn't feel anything at all, as if she had been drugged to sleep for a long time. Soon after that, Hannah woke up to a sound coming from the walkie-talkie she had placed nearby, so she could immediately know if Chloe tried to contact her. At that moment, Hannah heard Chloe's voice shouting her name. Upon hearing this, Hannah rushed to her daughter's room, but she didn't find Chloe there. Panicking, Hannah quickly checked other rooms in the house to look for her daughter. When she accidentally glanced at the window facing the swimming pool, her face turned pale as she saw something floating in the pool. Hannah ran to the pool and screamed hysterically when she found her daughter floating lifelessly. She quickly grabbed Chloe and brought her to the edge of the pool, desperately trying to save her. However, all her efforts were in vain because Chloe, her only daughter, had already passed away. All Hannah could do was cry over her daughter's death while holding Chloe's cold, lifeless body. Soon after that, Hannah, still deeply shaken by her daughter's death, was startled by strange noises coming from the walkie-talkie. She quickly picked up the walkie-talkie to check if it was broken or malfunctioning. At that moment, Hannah also heard a voice, which she believed to be Chloe's, calling for help. Thinking Chloe genuinely needed help, Hannah tried to reach out to her through the walkie-talkie, but it suddenly went dead. Since that incident, Hannah began experiencing more frequent, unexplainable occurrences. She often heard whispers from the dark corners of the house and saw glimpses of a dark entity roaming around. On top of that, Hannah frequently had nightmares and saw visions of her deceased daughter in the house. Hannah considered visiting a psychiatrist to check on her mental state, thinking she might be hallucinating due to the emotional trauma she suffered after Chloe's death. However, she decided against it when she remembered Mrs. Quinn, who lost her life while trying to help Chloe. Even so, Hannah didn't want these disturbances to continue, so she decided to contact James and Alice Hargreaves, the paranormal investigators recommended by a friend. When Hannah met James and Alice, she was a bit surprised and skeptical because they appeared much younger than she had expected. Noticing this, Alice said a few things to Hannah that left her very shocked, as Alice shouldn't have known such private details. Hannah then asked how Alice knew these things, and Alice simply replied that Chloe had told her everything. Upon hearing this, Hannah no longer doubted Alice and her brother James as paranormal investigators. Hannah also thanked James and Alice for being willing to come and help her, even though they had been informed about the tragic deaths of those who had previously tried to assist her. Alice explained that their work was not just about helping the living, but also about aiding restless spirits trapped in this world, so they could find eternal peace. After sharing all the details, Hannah then took the Hargreaves on a tour, showing them Chloe's room and the swimming pool. When they entered Chloe's room, Alice pressed her chest firmly, as if she was experiencing intense pain there. Seeing this, James immediately realized that Alice was having a retrocognition, a psychic ability that allows her to see past events that occurred in a particular place. When James asked her what she saw, Alice only replied that there was a very evil force residing in the house, and that this dark force had taken Chloe's life. While James set up multiple cameras and bells around the house to gather evidence of supernatural entities, Alice and Hannah tried to uncover the house's history. Hannah had already told Alice that the house was once a place where women accused of being witches were tried and punished. However, after further research, Alice revealed that the women who were tried were innocent, except for one named Ursula, who was a devil worshiper. Alice explained that Ursula had sacrificed her young daughter, Linda, who coincidentally was the same age as Chloe when she was killed. After sacrificing her own daughter, Ursula gained supernatural powers that allowed her to curse anyone she wished. Right after Alice said this, a swarm of green flies suddenly emerged from the air vents throughout the house. Because of this attack, James, who was on a ladder, lost his balance and fell, while Alice tried to open all the windows to get rid of the flies. As night fell, Alice emphasized to James and Hannah that they should always stay together for their own safety. Using her sixth sense, Alice could tell that the dark entity haunting the house was watching them, waiting for an opportunity to separate the three of them. At the same time, Hannah saw a figure resembling Chloe, signaling her to follow. Longing for her daughter, Hannah intended to approach Chloe, but Alice quickly stopped her, saying that the figure was not her daughter. Sure enough, the figure that Hannah saw as Chloe suddenly transformed into a terrifying entity and began creating supernatural disturbances to terrorize them. At that moment, James tried to protect Alice and Hannah, but the entity easily pushed him aside, clearing a path to get closer to Alice. Surprisingly, the dark entity did not intend to harm Alice. Instead, it wanted to reveal the truth about the horrifying events that had occurred in the past. Understanding this, Alice allowed the dark entity to possess her body, and she then experienced a vision of the tragic events from the past. Centuries ago, 5 women were tried and executed on that very site because they were considered heretics and accused of being devil worshippers. In reality, only Ursula was a devil worshipper, while the other 4 women were innocent. Although these 4 women did not hold any grudges, Ursula's curse trapped their souls there to this day. Moreover, Ursula's curse turned them into vengeful spirits, transforming them into terrifying dark entities. Alice also discovered that, in her final moments, Ursula cursed those who judged and executed her, as well as the place itself. Just before leaving Alice's body, the dark entity warned her about Ursula's curse, which is always marked by the appearance of green flies, and revealed the location where their remains, including Ursula's, were buried. When Alice regained consciousness, she unexpectedly found James standing in front of her, ready to stab her. It turned out that James had been affected by Ursula's curse, which caused him to lose control of his mind, allowing Ursula to take over his body. Fortunately, Alice managed to dodge the attack, and with the help of Hannah, who then struck James on the head with a bat, they were able to subdue James and knock him out. Knowing that James might wake up soon, Alice quickly told Hannah about her vision and how they could end everything. Determined to put an end to the terror in the house, Hannah agreed to help Alice find the door leading to the secret basement where the women's bodies were buried. After successfully opening the door, Alice instructed Hannah to gather as much gasoline as possible while she entered the secret basement first. Using only the light from her flashlight, Alice bravely stepped into the dusty, suffocating basement. Instead of a typical structure, the basement resembled a cave with stone walls. There, Alice found several machines and ancient tools that were usually used to torture prisoners before executing them. Alice tried to suppress her retrocognition ability, which had automatically activated the moment she set foot in the place. However, her efforts were in vain, as the suffering experienced by the women was so intense that it was beyond anyone's imagination. They were not only accused without any clear evidence, but also brutally tortured. As Alice tried to block out the flashes of retrocognition that flooded her mind, Chloe's spirit suddenly appeared and guided her to an iron cage containing human skeletons. Chloe also pointed to another iron cage hanging from the ceiling, and Alice immediately knew that the skeleton inside the hanging cage was Ursula. Alice quickly searched for a way to lower the cage, but at that moment, James suddenly appeared and attacked her. Alice fought back while trying to bring James to his senses by repeatedly calling his name. However, Ursula's curse was much stronger than Alice had anticipated, as James continued to attack her frantically. As Alice started to become overwhelmed, Hannah fortunately appeared, carrying a jerry can and a torch, trying to fend off James with the flames. While Hannah distracted James with her torch, Alice seized the opportunity to grab the jerry can and pour gasoline over the human skeletons in the room. Realizing what they were trying to do, James summoned a swarm of green flies into the basement to stop them. James grinned with satisfaction when the swarm managed to put out the fire, assuming that they had failed. But unexpectedly, Alice had managed to grab James' lighter during their fight, so she quickly ignited it and threw it at Ursula's skeleton, which had already been soaked in gasoline. Seeing this, James immediately panicked and tried to stop Alice, but he was too late, as the flames quickly spread. After Ursula's curse was broken, James finally regained his senses, but had no memory of anything that happened while the curse controlled his body. Meanwhile, Hannah quickly relit her torch and burned the skeletons in the iron cage so that the spirits of the women could rest in eternal peace. Soon after that, they hurried out and sealed the basement door to prevent the flames from spreading outside. At that moment, they also saw Chloe and Linda holding hands and smiling at them, a sign that the two young spirits had finally found peace. Hannah could not hold back her tears as she saw her daughter for the last time and took the opportunity to apologize to Chloe. Chloe simply nodded and smiled at her mother in response, then waved goodbye. The house fell silent once more. The whispers were no longer heard, and the air felt lighter. Alice and James decided to stay overnight because they were too tired to drive back to their home, which was quite far away. The next day, while tidying up Chloe's room, Hannah accidentally found some drawings that Chloe had made before her death. As Hannah looked more closely at the drawings, she realized they were parts of a death depiction of the people who had tried to help them. The first drawing showed the location where Mrs. Quinn had her accident. The second drawing was of a rocking chair where Martha was found dead from a heart attack. The third drawing depicted the rope Elena used to end her life. Besides these three, Hannah also found a drawing of a knife, exactly like the one James had used to attack Alice. Hannah wondered how Chloe could have drawn these things in such detail, especially since she had never told Chloe about their deaths. Moreover, Chloe was already dead when James and Alice came to the house. Shortly afterward, Alice, who was in the kitchen making coffee, looked a bit puzzled when she saw Hannah walking toward the swimming pool. Alice thought Hannah might be going for a swim, but unexpectedly, Hannah suddenly pulled out a gun and shot herself in the head. Seeing this, Alice immediately called James and rushed to the pool to try to save Hannah. But unfortunately, by the time they got there, Hannah had already lost her life. The scene then flashes back to some time earlier when Hannah was in Chloe's room and suddenly remembered the day Chloe died. That night, while Hannah was fast asleep, a green fly entered her ear and instantly activated Ursula's curse to take control of her body. Under the curse's control and having lost consciousness, Hannah went to Chloe's room, picked up her daughter, and carried her to the swimming pool. Without thinking, Hannah drowned Chloe in the pool, ignoring Chloe's struggles and desperate attempts to wake her mother up. After killing her daughter, Hannah went back to her room, changed her clothes, and went to sleep. In the present, Alice had actually discovered the truth when she had her retrocognition in Chloe's room. However, she chose to keep it a secret from Hannah at Chloe's request because Chloe didn't want her mother to blame herself for her death. Chloe understood that Hannah was being controlled by an evil force when she killed her, so she had already forgiven her mother. Even so, long before these tragic events took place, Chloe had drawn these things, as if she knew the future where she would die tragically. When Alice entered Chloe's room, she found a disturbing drawing that turned out to be the last one Chloe had made before her death. It was a drawing of Hannah pointing a gun to her own head. In the drawing, Hannah had tears streaming down her face, but what made Alice unable to hold back her own tears was the caption Chloe had written under it. Chloe had left a short, touching message for her mother. The message read, "It's okay, Mom. I forgive you and always love you.